Welcome and thank you for standing by. Currently, all participants are in a listen-only mode. Today's webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be posted publicly. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. Now I'd like to turn the call over to your host for today, Erling Dow.
Thank you, Lisa. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the September Local Employment Dynamics, or LED webinar. Before I introduce today's speaker, let's go over a few housekeeping rules. As mentioned earlier, this webinar is being recorded. For your convenience, it will be uploaded to our Census Academy site with the supplemental materials relating to the webinar within 30 business days. We welcome your questions during the webinar. Please submit your questions using the Q&A panel, which is located at the bottom right corner of your WebEx screen. Once you've found the Q&A panel, make sure you choose All Panelists from the drop-down menu. This will ensure we see your question. My colleague Tanja will be monitoring the Q&A panel. As time allows, we will answer your questions directly through the Q&A panel, or we will share your question with the presenter to respond to during the Q&A portion of the webinar. Also, we ask that you do not include any personal or business identifiable information with your questions. We suggest keeping the chat panel open as we will provide key links and other resources throughout the webinar. Keep in mind, you won't be able to respond to the chat. That is for us to send out links and other resources related to the presentation. As you know, we are in a virtual environment and sometimes technical difficulties might occur. If you are having issues, try a different browser, such as Chrome, or consider logging out and coming back into the session. If you are having audio issues, try selecting the computer audio or call via phone. On behalf of the U.S. Census Bureau and the LED Partnership, in collaboration with the Council for Community and Economic Research and the Labor Market Information Institute, it is my pleasure to welcome back Justin Krohn as he presents Decoding Commuting Distance Patterns Using Census Data. This presentation will provide a brief overview of the machine learning model trained to predict the average commuting distance for each census tract in the U.S. You will gain insights into the methodology employed for calculating the average commuting distance using Census Longitudinal Employer Household Dynamics Origin Destination Statistics, or commonly known as the LOADS dataset. Justin Krohn is a senior research project analyst for the Center for Applied Research and Engagement Systems for the University of Missouri Extension. He works on data for various projects within the center. He also works to automate data flows from beginning to end, including data download, processing, and mapping/visualizations. He has a bachelor's in science in natural resources from Washington State, a master's in geography from Western Illinois University, with a post-baccalaureate certificate in community development and planning, and is currently pursuing his PhD in geoinformatics. With that, I welcome Justin.
Thank you, Arlene. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Justin, and I work for the University of Missouri CARES, as we like to call ourselves. I do a lot of data analysis and GIS mapping, and I'll do a little demonstration of some of our tools at the end of the webinar. But for the first part, I wanted to just give you a brief presentation about a little project I did predicting commuting patterns for each census tract in the United States. So some of our previous work that we've done at CARES involved analyzing the LOADS dataset, which included calculating the mean commute distance for each census tract and county. So the mean commute distance is the straight line distance between two census blocks. And then if you're familiar with the LOADS, then you know that for each census block pair, it doesn't necessarily capture those that are working remotely, or maybe it captures work centers that are far away from the actual work sites. So what we did is we capped the distance at 125 miles. So if two blocks were more than that distance apart, we said that it probably wasn't a realistic daily commute, and we removed it from the calculations. So this is a map layer on our mapping interface, which I'll demonstrate for you later. And we have a couple other ones as well, including the commuters grouped by the distance traveled. So commuters with a short commute, commuters with a long commute or very long commute. We also have map layers about the commuters that are leaving or coming into an area for work. So the percent of commuters that are leaving their home county for work, that's another map layer in our interface. And then we also have all of the workplace area characteristics that are mapped, and these are the type of jobs that are available in each census tract or county. So after doing some of that initial analysis on the mean commuting distance, just looking at the map, you can notice some different trends. And so I was curious, why we see some of those commuting patterns that we see. And so approaching this project, my research questions were, what factors are the most important when determining how far people commute? And then where are the areas where people are commuting substantially further or not as far as what we might actually expect based off of some of the demographics and employment characteristics of the area. So to answer these questions, I developed a model called, it's a random forest, which is a machine learning method where you can feed in a wide variety of variables into the model, and the model will make trees. So that's why it's called a forest. So each tree, it will select just a handful of the variables and then make a prediction. And then for the next tree, it'll shuffle up the variables, select a random subset, and then make another prediction. And it continues this for as many times as you tell it to. And then at the end, it takes all those predictions and it averages out to have one final prediction. So the benefit of this is that you can use a wide number of variables in the input. And you don't have to worry as much about cross-correlation between the variables if two variables are related to each other, because the model shuffles them around, and so that bias is reduced in the model. So the variables that we used to train this model was the county metro status as of 2020, the size of the county, that is the land size, not the population. Then we use the 3 age variables from the origin destination data set, the 3 earnings variables, and the 3 job sector variables, all from the origin destination data set. And then for the workplace area characteristics, we use the county level characteristics, assuming that people are more likely to work within the county that they live versus within the same census tract. So we wanted to make sure to account for some of that spatial variation in where people work. So we use the county level characteristics there. So if you're familiar with building models, you know that it's standard practice to split the data set into a training set and a testing set. So we trained the data on 75% of the census tracts in the US, and then we tested that model. So once it was trained, we tested it on the remaining 25% that it had never seen. So that way we can get a real indicator of, is this model actually working when you apply it to something that it hasn't actually seen. So on the testing data set, we found that it was very good at predicting the average commuting distance. So the R-squared of 0.79 is very good. A 1.0 is perfect. That means it made no mistakes, got everything right. That's not realistic. That's not something that you aim for. So a 0.79 was a very good score. The average error was about 2.2 miles. So for each census tract, it was off on average by 2 miles. And then we found that the most important variable in the model was the percent of jobs in the county that were in agriculture, forestry, fishing, and hunting. So this slide is just showing some of the top 10 most important variables and their correlation. So one thing about random forest is that it doesn't tell you how it is related to the measure that you're trying to get. So what I had to do was run each of these variables individually and do a regression analysis to determine the direction. So in this case, jobs in agriculture, forestry, fishing, and hunting, as those jobs increase, then we expect the commuting distance to also increase. On the other hand, jobs in information, so as the number of jobs in information increase, or rather the percent of jobs in information increase, then we expect commuting distance to go down. Most of the most important variables are from those workplace area characteristics, so the type of jobs that are available in people's counties. But we also found that whether or not the county was considered metro or non-metro was a large factor. So for metro counties, people generally commuted less. For non-metro counties, people commuted more. And intuitively, this kind of makes sense. People commute into the cities where the majority of jobs are. If you are interested in looking at more of these, the variables and their correlations and importance, there is going to be a link at the end of the presentation to a blog post I wrote, and that has a table with all of these in there. So once we did the model and we validated it so that we were, sure that it worked as we expected, then we applied the model to every census tract in the US that had data. So you'll notice that Arkansas and Mississippi are gray. They didn't have any data. They don't submit data to the LOADS program. Same with Alaska. So those were not included in this analysis. Now the census tracts in red here are those where the predicted commute is lower than the actual commute. Or in other words, people are commuting further than what we might expect based off of the types of jobs available in the county, the demographics of those census tracts. Those people are commuting further than what we expect. Alternatively, the census tracts in blue are those areas where people are not commuting as far as we expect. So those are the two kind of classes. And then the tan color is where those census tracts, people are commuting about as far as what we would expect. So those actual thresholds that were set were a little bit arbitrary, but those 10%, those census tracts that were about what we expected, those are where the commuting distance is within 10% of the predicted commuting distance. And then for those dark red, those are variations of 40% or more. And then the dark blue is 40% on the other side. So 40% people are commuting 40% or more as far as the predicted. So in total, we had around 64,000 census tracts that were just about right. 10,000 census tracts that had a lower than expected average commute, and nearly 8,000 census tracts that had a higher than expected average commute. So on the image here, I zoomed into Chicago, and you can see that there's quite a bit of blue there in Chicago. So people in those census tracts are not commuting as far as we expect. And then you can see that those census tracts kind of on the edges of the counties adjacent to Chicago, those are the ones where people are commuting further than what we expect. And in this case, we think that that's just a function of people living in those census tracts being further away from Chicago where they actually work. But you can see there's a dark red census tract there in the center of Chicago, and we'll kind of explore that one a little bit more in detail. So what now? So now we have these predictions. So what do we do with it? And the hope is that this data can provide insight into areas where people are commuting further than expected, not as far as expected, but it also could highlight areas where the LEHD data isn't precisely catching the actual commuting patterns. And I'll show you an example of this on the dashboard in a few minutes. So the dashboard I built out, there's a URL here. There's also a link to it in the blog that's posted on SparkMap, and that URL will be available at the end of the presentation as well. So here is a sample of that dashboard for Cook County, Illinois. This is where Chicago is. So on the top right image, you can see the mean commuting distance. You'll see that every census tract in Chicago looks pretty much the same. They are generally, not commuting as far as people outside of the city. That's something that we kind of expect, but it doesn't make for a very exciting map of Chicago. When you apply the prediction map onto there, so where are people commuting differently than what we might expect, then you can start to see some of that variation. So we see there's several census tracts in the northern side of Chicago where people are not commuting as far as what we would expect. There's several census tracts on the south side where people are commuting further than what we expect. And then there's one census tract right in the middle where people are really commuting a lot further than we expect. So we're going to kind of zoom into that one a little bit. So on this top image here, you can see the census tract, the mean commute of nearly 18 miles, and then the predicted mean commute. So the model, when it went through and predicted the value for this, it said that people should be commuting around 12 miles. But in the actual raw data, people are commuting nearly 18. And then right next to this, we have a census tract where the predicted mean commute was pretty close. It was just under 11 miles was the predicted. And then the actual mean commute is 9.6 miles. So people in this census tract are commuting over 10 miles fewer than the one adjacent to it. So that's something that kind of gets lost when you're looking at the mean commute distance by itself. That's not something that would easily pop out. So with this method, we can kind of focus in on those two census tracts and start to ask the question, why? Now, the dashboard that I built doesn't attempt to answer that question, but we do have some tools at SparkMap where you can kind of start to answer that question in a little more detail. So SparkMap is a mapping interface that we have at CARES. It's one of many, but it's kind of the main one that we use for national level data. It's a free map room, so anyone can visit the map room and load any of these map layers onto there. And we have over 28,000 data layers, including all those layers from the LED data sets, the origin destination and the workplace area characteristics. We also have a lot of ACS data. We have broadband data. We have EPA and all sorts of stuff. So there's tons of data on here, and you can kind of layer them together. We have a tool where you can swipe between the layers, and that's kind of what you see here on the right. We do also have a reporting interface, and there is a version of this that is free, but it is a tiered subscription level. And this is where you can pick an area, could be a county, could be zip codes, and then you can pick your indicators and it'll generate a report for you. But back to that census tract in Chicago, we can see when I layered in the poverty level that census tract where people are commuting further than expected, they also have a relatively high level of poverty. And then on the layer below, we can see that they also have a relatively high number of people who are carpooling to work. Compare that to the census tract right next door, which has a low level of poverty, and it also has a low percent of people that are commuting or carpooling to work. So this is just a quick example. I am going to do a live demonstration of both the dashboard and some of these tools. But first, I just want to reiterate that this was kind of an initial analysis. And so there are plans to do some additional analysis. And so some of that idea is to create another reporting, a reporting interface where you'd be able to select a census tract or a zip code or some other geography, and it'll tell you visually, you can see where people are going to or from in the census tract, kind of like on the map from the census data or from the census that they already have. And then it will tell you the types of jobs that people in the tract have. But we can also, since we have so many data layers, we can add additional indicators into that report. So we can look at things like broadband, housing, and poverty, and look at all that in conjunction. And so users would be able to kind of get a one-stop shop and like see the commuting variables and indicators of interest for that area. So this is still just kind of in the idea phase. We work on grants and contracts, and most of my time is allotted for. So I'm kind of working on this kind of stuff when I have a spare minute or two. So I'm now going to pivot to a quick demonstration of some of our tools. So this is the dashboard I built out. This is just using the Esri dashboard interface. And so you'd be able to go into here and select your state of interest. So I'm going to select my state right now of Missouri. And I'm going to select Boone County, which is where I work and live. So Boone County is the home to the University of Missouri. So you can see that the average commuting distance for residents in Boone County is 19.2 miles. This map here is just the mean commuting distance. So there's a legend here so that you can get an idea of what these colors mean. You'll notice that kind of in the center of the county, there's two census tracts that are dark red. And so these are some of the things that kind of pop out in the mean commuting distance. It doesn't look like it's loading all the way, which just isn't a demonstration if something doesn't quite work right. So those two census tracts they have a much larger than expected commuting distance. And you actually see this phenomenon a lot in college towns everywhere. And presumably this is because of the college student population where their main address throughout the year is in the college town. And then they get summer jobs or internships or some other kind of employment back in their hometown or somewhere else. And that ends up kind of skewing what that data looks like. So this is the mean commuting distance. You can kind of see a breakdown of how many commuters have a short commute or a very long commute, and then the total number of commuters and the number of commuters that leave Boone County for work elsewhere. You can then hit this tab over and we get to that prediction layer. So so here you see those two census tracts really stand out. And then here you only kind of see the one. So that model was able to account for the demographics of that census tract up here and get a prediction that was pretty close to what the actual was. So here you see the predicted mean commute was 37 miles. So that's a pretty high predicted mean commute compared to this one right next door, where it's only 16 miles. Compared to this one, where the predicted mean commute was also 37 miles, but then the actual mean commute was around 50. So there's something about this census tract. People are even commuting much further than expected, and it, it's probably a function of just where the student population is from that live in this census tract. But you can find in this dashboard, when you select a county, it'll filter out the number of commuters that are commuting further than what you might expect, the number of commuters that are not commuting as far as you might expect, and more. So there's also a quick little methods tab here. I definitely encourage you all to give this a try and look what it looks like for your county or counties that you're interested in. But this dashboard doesn't have a direct link to our map room, so I'm going to demonstrate that now. This is the Spark map room. So this is what it looks like when you just first open it up, and you're able to type in keywords, search for something that you're interested in. You can see we have all sorts of stuff here. This is all from the loads data set. So I'm just going to check on the mean resident commute. So that's the layer that we're familiar with, and the number of commuters that are leaving their home county. And then you can also search for something like broadband, and you can get stuff from the FCC. So let's look at the percent of people who have access to broadband. So once you load up your layers, you are able to turn them on and off, see the ones that are below. You are also able to quickly switch the geography. So now we see the census tracts. And then we also have some data types here. So this is the percent. You can also look at the total. So this is just the total number of commuters who are leaving their home county for work. And then I recently added a 10-year change. So you can see how this compares to 2011. You can see the people on the east side of Boone County, those residents has had an increase in the number of people that are commuting out, whereas on the west side, there's been a decrease. And we have several nice tools here where if you have a map that you like, maybe you want to export it as a PDF. So let's just say I wanted to put on a mask and map only Missouri. You could do that, and then you could export this as an image. So, and you can choose to do the map or the map and the legend. You could choose orientation. So that's just a real quick demonstration of some of our mapping tools. I did want to make sure that I leave enough time for questions. So thank you all so much for listening. And there is a blog if you want to read more about how this model works. And if you have any questions or suggestions, please feel free to email me.
Okay, while we're waiting for Tanja.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Justin. Before we get to the questions, as a reminder, the presentation will be accessible on the Census Academy website at census.gov/academy under the webinar tab in a couple of weeks. The link has been added to the chat. Again, please type all of your questions in the Q&A and keep your questions pertaining to the presentation. The chat has been disabled to all of our attendees. And now for the questions. How are the estimated distance patterns adjusted for the substantial overestimate of long distance trips from the headquartering effect in the workplace location report? And overall, what are the average and standard deviation values of these commuting distances?
Yeah, so we don't directly account for the headquarter problem. We get at that a little bit by capping the mean commute distance at 125 miles, but we do understand that, you know, someone could live within 125 miles of the headquarters, but also their primary job be at a site that's closer than that. So that we attempt to get at that with the cap while still trying to account for people who do have realistic long commutes, and those do exist. So there's only so much we can do on that side. As far as the standard deviation and the mean, I'm not sure if you are talking about the national mean. I don't have that number off the top of my head, but I can certainly provide it in a few minutes after the presentation. If you want to email me or something, I can provide that.
Question. Thank you for this webinar. Are there separate resources or data to capture individuals who are working remotely, or is remote work subsumed under the broad category of commuting?
Yeah, so as it is right now, remote work is not able to be filtered from this data set. So as of now, the only cap that there is that 125-mile distance cap. If someone's commute is 2,000 miles, then that gets removed. You know, they're probably a remote worker or something like that. So, but if you are remote working within the same city that you live, then that doesn't get accounted for at all. So this is all just getting subsumed into that data.
Question. Why county and not MSA or USA?
So in the economic and community development sphere, county is kind of like a standard unit. So we can certainly include, you know, I'm assuming that they're talking about the variables that fed into the model. So using MSA could be another approach, and I think that would be helpful for areas that are within an MSA, but you know, there's a lot of rural areas that that would fall out of that, and so the county is kind of the standard.
Might have missed this one, but are you using block level centroid locations as the origin, and then are you using the Census Tiger line work as a network to traverse from the origin to the destination, or some other data set for routing the trip to derive the travel distance, or is it a straight centroid to centroid distance / time?
This is a straight centroid to centroid measurement. So it is something I would personally like to do it with a network. The issue there is that it would take an enormous amount of computing power to do that at a national scale. So right now, I don't want to tie up my work computer crunching that data for however many days it would take to run. So right now it's just centroid to centroid. I have thought about doing a case study of using the network, but I have not gotten to that yet.
Can you further elaborate on the negative relationship between the share of information jobs and distance? Info jobs are more likely to be work from home jobs so people can live further away.
Yeah, so again, this data set is a few years old. So while it was kind of peak COVID, some of those, I think now kind of work from home is, as we go on getting more and more established. And you're right that those kind of jobs do lend themselves to remote work. But I don't know that I can elaborate more than that's what the model found. I think those kind of jobs tend to be centered in places like larger cities. So, and those areas tend to have less commuting. You don't find a lot of information jobs out in rural areas. So since they are in larger cities as well, those tend to be people, even if they work from home, they might live in that city where their office is. So it's kind of a hybrid approach, or whatever the case may be.
When you have a chance, can you please copy the link that you discussed for the blog into the chat?
Tanja, I already did that.
Okay,
him.
very good. Thank you. Okay, next question. What about the effect of home values?
That is something we didn't consider in this model, but it would be something I could include in a future iteration. I do plan to do this again with the upcoming loads release in the next couple of months or whenever it is. And I do plan on changing a couple of things just to kind of see if we can further refine the model. But as of now, that was not considered.
The ACS asked respondents how much time they spend commuting, but not how far in distance. Did you consider including this information into your model, or how the time compared to the distance from your model or directly from loads?
Yeah, so that is something that I considered. When I initially came up with this idea, I wanted to use as much data from the same data set as possible to do the predictions, just to kind of keep it consistent. But I did end up including some outside ones like land area and metro status. I do think in future iterations, I want to include some other variables, such as those ones from the ACS. And I haven't done a strict comparison between the time spent commuting and the commuting distance. Nationwide, I have worked with a colleague who did a very limited case study in Missouri with those two variables, but we haven't expanded it nationwide. So that is something I will potentially look at in the future.
How does having a job in the educational field impact commute distance?
Well, I would have to go back and look at that data specifically. I don't know off the top of my head. So if you want to email me that question, I can respond to you in more detail.
Topographically, Chicago isn't interesting. Denver?
Yeah, so I do think that there would be some more interesting places. Denver with the mountains kind of as a natural barrier. There's other places where rivers would be natural barriers, and maybe there's one bridge that goes across the river, and that would kind of limit some of the or I guess that would affect the mean commuting distance with a block-to-block measurement, right? Because people might actually have to divert around those barriers. So that is something I would like to try to get at, again, with that network-based approach where it's a road network and not just a straight line distance. So that is something I would like to explore more in the future. But if you're interested in Denver from this data set, go ahead and look at that dashboard and just zoom into Denver, and you can at least see how it looks in the current form.
Why are these variables, poverty, home values, not incorporated into the random forest model?
So again, this was kind of my idea at the beginning, was to just use the data from loads. So that way it's consistent, the consistent number of commuters for each census tract and county, consistent across all the variables. ACS is going to have a different number, like different denominator, right, on its variables. So I just did this for consistency for this first iteration, but I would like to include ACS potentially in future iterations.
In reference to college students skewing data, do you trust the model more than the stats?
I'm not quite sure what they're getting at. So I think what they're saying is the stats say that, like in the example I gave, that census tract says that the average commute distance is 50 miles, whereas the model said it should be around 37. And the fact is, I don't trust either of them in that particular case. The model is probably closer to the reality, you know, but I think it's more of a it's just a relic of the data. So there's nothing that you can really do about it, I guess. It's just kind of what the data is. That's just how it's collected. That's just how it's processed. For that particular case, I don't know that you could reliably filter out college students and get a more accurate portrayal, but there may be some methods that you could potentially try. But I guess to answer the question, I don't particularly trust either in the terms of college students. I think it's just something that needs its attention brought to so that you can make informed decisions.
Is the tool available to play with?
Yes. So there is a link to the tool in this SparkMap blog, and you can go and play with it.
I appreciate the need to carry out analysis using straight line distances between census blocks, census tracts, and zip code areas, centroids. But it seems like the loads data at the block level is prime for analysis using real road routes via GIS route analysis. That's a question. Okay. I know, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Was there more?
I know these proprietary geodatabases are expensive to access, but it seems like calculating the real road distance in miles and minutes between all possible census blocks capped at 120 files max would be an interesting next method.
Yeah, and I agree. That is something I want to try. I'm just going to try it at a much smaller scale first. Doing that at a national scale would be an enormous computing cost, and I just don't have the computing resources to try to do that reliably.
Next is more of a statement. Huge issue with your polygons, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, 500K state level is much, much better.
Yeah, so for the geographies, I use the Census Tiger files, not the clipped cartographic files. So if that's what you're referring to, like the shapes, don't really outline the Great Lakes very well. That's just because of that. That doesn't come into the analysis at all. So it doesn't affect the analysis. It's just a visualization thing. So.
Great presentation. Were there any variables that you would have wanted to include in your model but could not due to data limitations or some other reason?
I think, it gets to a point where we had nearly 30 variables in the model, and it gets to a point of like, well, how many do you really need? The model did very well, and I don't suspect that adding additional variables would increase the model's proficiency significantly. The only thing that may come of it is you may see, how important those variables are, generally speaking, in relation to each other. But as far as the model output, I don't suspect that they would cause a huge, increase in accuracy in the model or anything like that. But I do want to use some additional variables in future iterations, such as from the American Community Survey. So we'll see how that goes.
For the comment, thank you. Terrific presentation and project to share. Then there's a question. Can your model estimate the average trip generation rate by residential unit in each census tract?
Can you repeat that, Tanja?
Sure. Can your model estimate the average trip generation rate by residential unit in each census tract?
I'm not sure what a trip generational rate is. I would say that if you have some kind of data set that captures what that variable is, you could train a model to do that, but I don't think that my particular model would do that at this time.
As for remote working, you could potentially use the ACS means of transportation to work from home for at least those that work usually from home. That's a statement.
Yeah, that's something we can consider, but we can't use that to reliably filter the underlying loads data set. So it just kind of becomes a confounding factor.
Can you comment, or is there a study about the association between commuting time and income or job type? Thank you.
I haven't done a lot of background research into that, so I'm not sure that I can comment on that. I think from this model, generally speaking, people with lower income tend to commute further. But I think there's a lot of variables that come into play. So that's about as much as I can say on that. I think there are probably more expansive studies that would study individuals rather than aggregates of people that would be more reliable. I just haven't done the background research on that.
Were other ML models tested before settling on the random forest model?
No, so I went to random forest because that is what I am most familiar with. I have done a few other machine learning type models, but random forest tends to be less computing intensive, and it's also relatively easy to do from a coding perspective. So I just went with what was familiar to me, and the result was a very strong prediction performance. So I was happy with it.
When looking at real world distances, don't forget that not everyone drives to work.
Yeah, and incorporating some of those other modes of transportations, trains, buses, ferries, walking, that would be another challenge. But while not everyone drives to work, the majority of Americans do, and so I still think that is a good kind of stepping stone there.
Last question. Do you collect data on walking to work?
We don't collect data at all. So this data is from the LOADS data set. The American Community Survey does collect a walking to work variable, and that is, I believe, available in our map room as SparkMap. So if you are interested in looking at that particular metric, go to SparkMap and go to the map room, and you can load in that particular indicator.
We had one more question come in. Did you try using or combining data from previous years to enhance the accuracy of your results?
Not yet. So that is something that I've been discussing with my my colleague Alan Spell, who the census folks on this call are familiar with, looking at potential some 10-year changes and seeing how well this model also works when applied to data from 10 years ago, because it's possible that it changed, or if we can use this model or a variation of this model to predict how it would have changed. That's something that we are asking questions about now. It's still kind of in the planning phase, but nothing has come of it yet.
And another question, what are your thoughts on applications of this work in terms of policy and transportation planning?
Yeah, so coming from a community and economic development background, I thought that this model was kind of neat, but I don't have a strong policy background. So I think though that if you are able to kind of identify those areas where people are commuting further than what you would expect, you can kind of leverage that information from a policy perspective, and maybe you can advocate for additional bus routes to this area. If you'd want to do additional studies on potential ridership and that kind of thing, but I do think it could be a tool to kind of narrow down some of that those decision makings of like, well, we know that there is a group of people here that are commuting really far into the town. Wouldn't it be nice if we could provide some public transportation or something like that? So I do think it is a starting point for some of those policy discussions, but I don't think it is the the final product of that.
Concludes our question and answer session.
Thank you so much. Wow, what great questions. And thank you for so many positive comments. I want to thank you for joining us this afternoon, and thank you to Justin for his excellent presentation. Justin, would you like to make any closing remarks?
I'll just say that this kind of analysis really is fun for me and exciting. And if anyone has any comments or suggestions or potential collaborations, definitely reach out. I'd love to chat more about it.
Great. Well, this concludes the September LED webinar. Please join us next month on Wednesday, October 16 at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time when Aurelia Glass presents New Policy Benefits Communities That Lost Manufacturing Jobs in lieu of Manufacturing Week earlier in the month. Upon exiting this webinar, you will receive a pop-up to an evaluation. We would appreciate that you take the time to answer the questions so we may better serve you with future webinars. On behalf of the U.S. Census Bureau and the LED Partnership, thank you for joining us. Until next time, enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
This concludes today's webinar. Thank you for your participation. You may disconnect at this time.